Did you know that one of India's fiercest rulers, Tipu Sultan, was both celebrated as a visionary nationalist and vilified as a religious bigot? Of course, it's not an unknown fact. The Tiger of Mysore, a man who defied the British Empire with unparalleled valor, remains one of the most debated figures in Indian history. But today, we are going to talk about what led to his dramatic downfall. Was it betrayal, or was it British imperialism, or the complex realities of his rule? Stick around because today we unravel this rise and fall of Tipu Sultan and the myths and the legends surrounding his legacy. Let's rewind back to the December of 1782. Amidst the chaos of the Second Anglo-Mysore War, Hyder Ali succumbed to cancer. Hyder Ali, the father of Tipu Sultan, who went on to lay the foundation of what was called as the Sultanate of Mysore. This warrior left behind a legacy that his son Tipu Sultan would inherit. The mantle passed to the young Tipu, who was known for his intellect, innovative military strategies, and unwavering determination. Though Tipu managed to sign the Treaty of Mangalore in 1784 with the British, this marking an uneasy truce, he remained an unyielding foe to the British East India Company back then. This treaty, while restoring the status quo, planted the seeds of distrust on both sides. Tipu's ambition to consolidate Mysore and challenge the British supremacy would lead to a series of epic confrontations that ended in tragedy. By 1789, tensions were escalating as Tipu Sultan sought to assert his control over Travancore, which was a British ally. His claims were clear. Travancore's purchase of two forts from the Dutch within his territories was unacceptable to him, and his attacks on Travancore marked the beginning of the Third Anglo-Mysore War that lasted between 1790 to 1792. This was a war that saw the Marathas, Nizam of Hyderabad, and the British unite against the Enter Lord Charles Cornwallis, the new Governor General and the Commander-in-Chief, who had been brutally battered fighting the Americans in the American War of Independence. In 1791, Lord Cornwallis led an allied force against Tipu. After enduring Tipu's scorched earth tactics, Cornwallis captured Bengaluru, or Bangalore it was called back then, which was a critical fortress in the heart of the Mysore kingdom. The British gained access to the resources and morale, setting the sights of Seringapatam, which was the Tipu's capital. Unlike his predecessors, Cornwallis understood the importance of overwhelming his allies. His forces comprised of British troops, sepoys, and the allied cavalry from the Nizams and the Marathas. This creating an army Mysore could not match in numbers. The war concluded in 1792 with Tipu signing the Treaty of Seringapatam, one of the most humiliating defeats he faced in his reign. He ceded half his territories to the British and their allies, paid a hefty war indemnity of almost 3 crore rupees, and gave two of his sons as hostages. Imagine a father's pain of seeing his own blood being dressed in finery were paraded as symbols of British dominance. Despite this humiliation, Tipu worked relentlessly to rebuild his kingdom and military back. And as Tipu worked to regain his strength, he turned to distant allies, particularly the French. Of course, even his father, Hyder Ali, had very good relations with the French, which Tipu took forward. In letters exchanged with Napoleon Bonaparte, the monarch and the ruler of France, Tipu proposed a grand alliance to oust the British from India. When Napoleon expressed his interest, his Egyptian campaign prevented him from aiding Tipu directly. Nevertheless, the specter of the Franco-Mysorean alliance terrified the British. Cornwallis left India, but his legacy of containing Mysore persisted. Tipu's growing ties with the French and his efforts to reach out to the Ottomans and the Afghans painted him as a defiant ruler. The British, meanwhile, sharpened their strategy, preparing for a final confrontation. The year was 1978, and Lord Wellesley, the newly appointed Governor General of India, surveyed the fractured landscape of the Indian subcontinent. His mission was clear: expand British dominance over the Indian territories. But Wellesley was no ordinary military strategist. He was a diplomat with a cunning plan. Instead of relying solely on costly wars, he devised a policy called Subsidiary Alliance that would bring princely states under British control without firing a shot. The Indian ruler of the princely state would agree to host a British garrison within his territory. These troops were ostensibly there to defend the kingdom from the external threats. However, the kingdom had to pay the maintenance of these forces. And also, the British would place a British resident in the kingdom who would keep an eye on the activities of the ruler. If the ruler couldn't afford the payments, he would be compelled to cede parts of his territory as compensation. But that's not all. The ruler had to relinquish control over foreign policy. He could no longer form alliances, declare war, or maintain an independent military without the British approval. On paper, the ruler retained sovereignty. In reality, he became the puppets in the hands of the East India Company. Wellesley's first target was the Nizam of Hyderabad, a ruler caught between powerful enemies and very much immersed in his own merries, the Marathas to the west and Tipu Sultan to the south of India. The Nizam, desperate for protection, signed the Subsidiary Alliance in 1798. Overnight, Hyderabad's independence was eroded. British troops were stationed in the kingdom, and the Nizam became a loyal pawn in Wellesley's larger scheme of plan. Wellesley's strategy was a masterstroke. Once the Nizam was secured, other rulers began to fall in line, either coerced by diplomatic pressure or defeated in the battle. The Marathas were brought under alliance after the defeat in the Second Anglo-Maratha War. The rulers of Awadh, Tanjore and Peshwa followed, all tied to the British through this seemingly benevolent arrangement. Not everyone fell to this trap though. Tipu Sultan, the defiant ruler of Mysore, saw through the facade. To Tipu, this alliance, the subsidiary alliance, was not a pact of protection but a noose that would choke his kingdom's sovereignty. He refused to sign, fully aware of the consequences. Tipu's resistance to the alliance only fueled Wellesley's determination to crush him. By isolating Mysore diplomatically, Wellesley ensured that Tipu would stand alone in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. The Marathas and the Nizam, both bound by the subsidiary alliances, joined forces with the British against Mysore, leaving Tipu to face the might of the EIC alone. For rulers who accepted the alliance, the illusion of independence quickly faded. They retained their thrones, but their power was hollow. British residents were stationed in their courts, monitoring every decision. Any attempt to rebel was met with swift retribution. Over time, the subsidiary alliance became a tool not just of expansion but of economic exploitation, draining the treasuries of the Indian kingdoms. A ruler sits in his grand court surrounded by British officers. He signs the alliance believing it will save his kingdom from external threats, but years later, he finds his treasury empty, his policies dictated by a foreign resident, and his people disillusioned. What began as a promise of protection had turned into a silent conquest. Cut to 1799, the British were determined to crush Mysore. Under Lord Wellesley, they launched the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. Despite his dwindling resources, Tipu resisted fiercely. Tipu Sultan's downfall wasn't etched in destiny, it was carved by the treacherous hands of one of his own. Among the shadows of betrayal stood Mir Sadiq, a name that would forever reek of infamy. Official records, courtesy of our colonizers, mark Tipu Sultan's death on May 4, 1799, but the fall of the Tiger of Mysore has different versions that we've come. Mir Sadiq, the conniving man that he was, colluded with the British emissaries, promising to undermine Mysore defences in exchange for personal rewards. As British launched their assault on Seringapatam, Mir Sadiq ordered Mysore soldiers to withdraw from their positions, claiming they needed to regroup. Confused but obedient, the troops abandoned their posts. The British, finding the defences inexplicably unmanned, surged forward. At the same time, another traitor within the ranks, Diwan Purnaya, who once served as the finance minister of Tipu Sultan and helped the economy of Mysore grow, assassinated Ghazi Khan, one of Tipu's staunchest commanders, creating further disarray. Tipu, realizing too late that he had been betrayed, fought valiantly but was eventually overwhelmed. His body was later found near the Watergate, still clutching his sword, a testament to his unyielding spirit even in death. Another version suggests that Tipu, unaware of the British breach, attempted to escape the fort through the Watergate in a palanquin. His plan was to regroup loyalists outside Seringapatam and launch a counteroffensive. As a palanquin moved through the narrow passage, it was caught in the chaos of the Mysorean soldiers fleeing and British troops advancing. The palanquin overturned, throwing Tipu to the ground. Disoriented and injured, he tried to fight his way out but was overpowered. Legend says that when a British officer demanded his surrender, Tipu replied, "The Tiger of Mysore does not surrender." Moments later, a musket shot ended his life. His body was found buried beneath a heap of his slain soldiers, his sword still clenched in his hand. Mir Sadiq's fate was grim. Mysorean soldiers, enraged by his treachery, dragged him from his hiding place. He was killed on the spot, his body mutilated by the very people he betrayed. His mausoleum, located somewhere in Seringapatam, remains a symbol of infamy, often pelted with stones and shoes by visitors who remember his treachery. Almost 42 years earlier, in 1757, another traitor had changed the course of Indian history. If you remember, his name was Mir Jaffer, a commander in the Bengal army. He betrays the Nawab, Siraj-ud-Dawla, during the Battle of Plassey. Like Mir Sadiq, Mir Jaffer's betrayal was driven by promises from the British this time by Robert Clive, who assured him the throne of Bengal. At Plassey, Mir Jaffer withheld his troops, allowing the British to rout Sirajud-Dowlah's forces. The British victory marked the beginning of their political dominance in India as Bengal's immense wealth fell into their hands. Though he achieved his goal of becoming the Nawab of Bengal, his reign was humiliating. The British stripped him of real power and he spent his final years a puppet, despised by his people and his patrons alike, and of course being succeeded by another person who he did not like. Coming back to our tale, with Tipu gone, the British reinstalled the Wadayar dynasty as puppet rulers. Of course, they also signed the Subsidiary Alliance. The once mighty Mysore was reduced to the shadow of its former self, its sovereignty replaced by British dominance. Diwan Purnaya played a key role in stabilizing Mysore post-Tipu. While he is often seen as a loyal administrator, his accommodation of British interest always has raised questions. Tipu's death marked the end of Mysore's independence, but his legacy lived on. For the British, he was a villain, a tyrant who needed to be subdued. Yet, Indian historians and leaders like APJ Abdul Kalam have hailed him as a patriot who fought against the colonial rule. But here's when the narrative gets a little murky. Right-wing historians labeled Tipu a bigot, citing forced conversions and temple destructions, particularly against the Kodavas and the Catholics in Mangalore or Mangaluru. However, these accounts often rely on British records, infamous for their propaganda, and a lot of written historical records are not available, while most of these are verbal history. In contrast, Tipu's support for temples like Sringeri and his Hindu ministers like Diwan Purnaya highlight his pluralistic governance. So was he a nationalist or a communalist? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, and here's a $1,000,000 question that we all ask. If Tipu was such a tyrant, why did the British fear him, even in death? Even Tipu's body became a trophy for the British triumph. Paintings like the David Wilkie's portraits of General Bai discovering his corpse reduced Tipu to a symbol of Eastern despotism crushed by Western civilization. But beyond colonial narratives, Tipu's contributions remain undeniable, be it military innovation, statecraft, or even his resistance to imperialism. Modern day debates around Tipu Sultan reflect contemporary politics rather than historical accuracy. His rule was neither entirely secular nor wholly sectarian. It was shaped by geopolitical exigencies of the time. And that's how history is supposed to be seen. Tipu's life is a study in contrasts. He was a ruler who embodied the spirit of resistance, yet his policies were sometimes ruthless. His legacy is a battleground for ideologies, praised as a patriot by some, vilified as bigot by others. His innovation in governance, military strategy, and diplomacy continue to inspire modern policymakers. The rockets he developed were precursors to modern missile technology that the world took forward. His resistance to colonial forces reminds us of the cost of freedom. So, who was Tipu Sultan really? A freedom fighter, a tyrant, or a man caught in the crossfire of history? Perhaps the answer lies in understanding him as a man of his time, an ambitious leader navigating the complexities of the 18th century politics of India. Tipu Sultan's story is not just history, it's a mirror reflecting the challenges of modern India. What do you think about Tipu Sultan? A patriot, a controversial ruler, or something more nuanced? Share your thoughts in the comment section on today's date, which is one of the most important days in the lives of Tipu's history. We're coming up with further stories on him, busting certain claims made by some popular authors. So stay tuned to this space, and thanks so much.